At night, the fog spread over the town like a heavy shroud, swallowing every street, every lamppost, and every trace of life. The river beneath the old bridge churned with a quiet force, and the air carried a damp chill that clung to the skin. In the middle of that silence, a figure appeared, a woman in a white dress, her form emerging from the mist as if she had been created by it. Her bare feet touched the slick boards of the bridge, each step leaving a dark mark that spread slowly as though the wood itself bled. She moved without hesitation, her head tilted slightly downward, her long hair hanging damp against her back. The fog thickened around her, concealing her form in fragments, and only the steady rhythm of her steps echoed in the air. By morning, the mist had lifted, revealing the town as if nothing had happened. Yet the bridge bore silent testimony to the night before. A single glove rested near the railing, its fabric soaked and stiff, and a torn scrap of white cloth clung to a rusted nail. The water below moved in slow currents, reflecting the pale light of dawn, but no trace of the woman remained. The police filed their reports with quiet efficiency, but no family came forward. No missing person was matched to the fragments found. The silence of the town only grew heavier, carrying with it a sense of recognition, as though the people had seen this before and knew better than to question it. The older residents exchanged glances without words, their eyes tired, their mouths pressed into thin lines. They did not linger by the bridge and did not discuss the events in public. Whispers carried in shops and along sidewalks, always ending in the same refrain: the bridge had taken another soul. For some, it was only superstition, but for those who had lived long enough, it was a truth buried in their bones. As the day wore on, the atmosphere of the town shifted, not with panic, but with an uneasy acceptance. Into this silence came the newcomers, their cars rolling slowly down the narrow streets, their faces lit with curiosity and hope. They saw only the charm of the small town, the quaint houses, the trees bending over the water. To them, this was a place of retreat and rebirth, far from the weight of the world they had left behind. Yet, unseen eyes seemed to follow them, and the river, calm on the surface, held its secrets close. With their arrival, the story of the night on the bridge was no longer only a whisper from the past, but the opening of something that waited to unfold. Evan had chosen the house by the river for its solitude, its long windows that opened to the restless water, and the illusion of distance from everything he wanted to leave behind. The structure was large, but the rooms carried an emptiness that no furniture or personal belongings could disguise. The walls seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like an unfamiliar presence moving through the halls. The house offered space, but not warmth, as though something vital had long since departed and left only a shell. The neighbors had spoken cautiously when they learned of his choice, hinting that others had stayed there, but never for long. Their words carried no specific warnings, only the weight of repetition, a history too vague to deny, yet too fragile to confirm. For Evan, that uncertainty was not a deterrent, but a temptation. He found in their reluctance a challenge, an invitation to prove he could endure what others could not. The first nights brought restless sleep. He would lie in the dark, listening to the constant rush of the river, a sound that was never entirely the same, but always persistent, like breathing against the house. At times, woven into the rhythm of the water, he thought he heard something softer, a quiet laugh, delicate and distinctly feminine, carrying through the windows even when they were closed. He dismissed it as a trick of half-sleep, a dream that clung to waking hours. One night, he woke abruptly, his skin damp with a heat that seemed to radiate from the walls. The house felt alive in a way he could not name, pressing against him with unseen weight. When his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw Lauren, the woman he had met only days earlier, standing at the window. She was unclothed, her bare skin catching the faint silver of moonlight. Her hands rested on the glass, her breath fogging its cold surface, leaving fleeting marks that dissolved into nothing. The curve of her body, illuminated in fragments by the shifting glow from the river, seemed both human and unreal, as though the house itself had conjured her from shadow. Their closeness came suddenly, urgent and unrestrained, as though they sought to silence the murmurs of the night with the intensity of their bodies. Each touch seemed to echo louder than the creaks of the house, a defiance against the unease that lingered at the edges of the room. The rhythm of the river outside merged with the pulse of their movements until the boundaries between the house, the night, and their intimacy blurred. When silence finally settled, Evan lay in the dim light, his breath still uneven. It was then he heard it. Faint steps in the hallway, measured and deliberate, moving closer, pausing, then continuing. The sound was unmistakable, but there was no one else in the house. The air grew colder, and the emptiness that had seemed harmless before now pressed against him with the weight of something watching. During the following day, Evan wandered into the local library, a dim building whose wooden beams carried the weight of years. The air smelled of paper that had absorbed both dust and dampness, a scent that reminded him of cellars and forgotten trunks. On a shelf pushed into the farthest corner, he found a book that seemed untouched for decades. Its leather cover was cracked, and faint markings in the margins hinted at notes left by other hands long ago. The pages spoke of the so-called keepers of the bridge. The accounts traced back to the 19th century, when floods had threatened to erase the settlement again and again. To appease the river, villagers offered small sacrifices, animals, food, and eventually human lives. The rituals were whispered about, never openly acknowledged, but the book claimed the river demanded more than offerings. It needed a witness, one person in every generation chosen to see and carry the burden of its memory. If the chosen refused, the river would rise in fury, swallowing land and lives until balance was restored. Evan read with growing detachment, convincing himself it was folklore, an artifact of superstition preserved by people who had no other way to explain disaster. The notion of a chosen witness struck him as melodramatic, a piece of theater bound to myth. He closed the book with a finality that suggested dismissal, yet the details clung stubbornly in his thoughts. Lauren responded differently. When he shared fragments of the story with her, her eyes lingered on him in silence, her body tensing with a quiet recognition. She moved through the rest of the day with caution, her gestures subdued, as though unseen eyes might be following her. That evening, the unease between them translated into urgency. Their desire seemed heavier than before, a force pulled not from simple longing, but from an instinct to push back against something encroaching. In the bedroom, their bodies met with an intensity sharpened by fear. Her skin carried a trace of salt, as if the river itself had marked her. The air was charged with dampness, and through the open window came the hiss of the wind, curling around the edges of the house, whispering sounds that rose and fell like names. The closeness they shared felt like defiance, but also like surrender to a rhythm not entirely their own. When the moment reached its peak, Evan's gaze caught the surface of the mirror across the room. In the glass, their forms intertwined, yet a third presence lingered, a shadow that did not move as they did. It shifted independently, stretching and bending as though its shape was not bound by flesh. A cold tremor slid down his spine, and the room seemed to contract, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Evan's nights became restless, haunted by visions that blurred the line between dream and memory. He saw the town swallowed by black water, rooftops vanishing beneath waves that carried faceless figures drifting silently with the current. Their presence pressed against him like a weight, each featureless shape turning toward him as if demanding acknowledgement. He woke drenched in sweat, his chest heaving, the echo of rushing water still in his ears. By daylight, he carried those images like a sickness. He convinced himself the story of the keepers was nothing more than a cage built by fear, and he swore he would not be trapped inside it. One evening, with determination hardening into defiance, he dragged the old book to the hearth. Its cracked leather cover flaked in his hands as he tore out the pages and fed them to the fire. The ink curled into smoke, words dissolving into ash as though centuries of secrets were erased in moments. The flames licked hungrily, and the room filled with the acrid stench of burned parchment. For a fleeting second, Evan felt free, but deep inside, he knew destruction was not the same as escape. That night, Lauren returned, her presence as sudden as it was inevitable. Her hair clung to her shoulders, damp as though she had emerged straight from the river. She moved without hesitation, slipping into his arms with an urgency that burned as fiercely as the fire still smoldering in the hearth. Their bodies collided with a violence born from fear and longing, each kiss an attempt to silence the storm rising outside and the one gathering inside their veins. Her skin was cool against his fevered flesh, and the contrast drove him deeper into her embrace. Yet beneath the frenzy, there was something other, something wrong. As he held her tighter, her fingers pressed into him with a chill that sank into his bones. When his gaze locked on her eyes, he did not see firelight reflected there. Instead, he saw shifting currents, waves rolling endlessly across dark water. The realization struck him like a blow, and he recoiled, pushing her back. She did not resist. Instead, a faint smile curved her lips, serene and knowing, as if his fear had been foreseen. In that silence, the house trembled. A distant roar rose from beyond the walls, a deep groan of collapsing stone and iron. Evan recognized the sound before his mind could deny it, the old bridge shattering under the weight of something unseen. The storm did not begin with thunder, but with a relentless curtain of rain that refused to break. For 3 days, the sky emptied itself onto the valley, and the river swelled with a hunger that could not be sated. Its banks dissolved, its current roared, and the quiet streets transformed into canals of rushing black water. Trees snapped and drifted like broken matchsticks. Cars vanished beneath the churning surface, and houses groaned as their foundations surrendered. Evan fought against the growing panic, watching the familiar streets of the town vanish one by one beneath the flood. He clung to the thought of escape, but when he reached the bridge, he saw only jagged remnants of wood and steel swallowed by the torrent. The last path outward had already been claimed. Behind him, the river stretched in every direction, a vast, merciless body that seemed to pulse with its own life. When he returned to the house, it was no longer empty. Dampness lingered in the air like breath, and the walls shivered as if aware of something he could not see. Lauren was gone, her presence reduced to a fading trail of wet footprints that stopped in the center of the room. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm, as though the house itself was holding back a secret it could no longer contain. Driven by a mix of desperation and dread, Evan descended into the cellar. The familiar stone walls seemed narrower, the air heavier, as if the house had shifted around him. There, half hidden in shadow, he noticed a door he had never seen before, its wooden frame swollen from the damp, its surface etched with faint grooves. With trembling hands, he forced it open, and a draft of cold air swept across him, carrying the scent of the river. Beyond the door stretched a narrow spiral staircase of slick stone. He followed it down into the earth, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The walls were carved with strange markings, curved and angular symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. He recognized them from the book he had burned, symbols of offerings and warnings, yet here they were alive, untouched by flame. The deeper he descended, the louder the roar of water became, until it filled his skull, drowning every thought. At the base of the stairs, the passage opened into darkness. The river pressed against it, the barrier trembling with the force of the flood. Then, with a groan like the splitting of bone, the wall yielded. Water surged forward, striking him with crushing weight. He staggered, clawing for breath, but the flood carried him upward, twisting him against stone and shadow. In that moment, clarity struck him with a force greater than the torrent. The book had not been destroyed, the legend had not been silenced, and the choice had never been his. The river had chosen, as it always had, and now he understood the role forced upon him. He was the witness, the one bound to see and remember as the town was swallowed once more. He screamed, but his voice was lost in the roar. The current coiled around him like a living hand, dragging him into the depths where no light reached. The last air in his lungs was torn away, and the weight of the water folded him into silence. The river closed over him, and all became dark. The morning unfolded with a fragile calm, as if the storm had been a fever dream rather than a devastation. The rain had ceased, and the swollen river slowly crept back within its banks, leaving behind mud, broken branches, and the husks of drowned machines. The townspeople emerged cautiously from the shelters where they had waited, their eyes searching the ruined streets for pieces of their former lives. The air smelled of damp soil and decay, yet beneath it lingered an uneasy stillness that no one dared to name. Evan's house stood untouched on the outside, its walls weathered but upright, its roof still whole. To those who passed, it looked like a survivor among the wreckage, but its silence was deeper than the silence of other homes. Curtains clung wetly to the windows, their fabric heavy with river water that had no reason to be there. Inside, the rooms carried a strange emptiness, not the vacancy of abandonment, but the void of something erased. Dustless shelves, cold air, and walls that seemed to absorb sound created the impression that no one had ever lived within them. On the table in the main room, the only remnant of presence lay charred and brittle, the blackened cover of the book Evan had once tried to destroy. Its spine had collapsed into ash, but the faint outline of symbols still marked the surface, as if fire itself had failed to consume them entirely. The pages were gone, yet the weight of what they contained remained, filling the air like smoke that refused to disperse. Curiosity drove a group of local teenagers into the cellar, their laughter nervous, their flashlights trembling in their hands. They expected hidden passages, the kind of secret they could boast about later, but what they found unnerved them. The wall at the far end of the basement stood solid, seamless stone, without a trace of a doorframe or stairwell. To their eyes, there was nothing but rock, cold and indifferent. Some insisted that the wall felt damp, as if the river still pressed against it from the other side. They did not linger long. Life in the town resumed with a strange determination. People patched their roofs, dragged ruined furniture out onto the streets, and tried to forget the nights of thunder and flooding. The river, once again calm, flowed past the town as if nothing had happened. Yet it carried with it a new whisper, one that slipped between conversations at the market and over fences between neighbors. Those who walked along the banks swore they saw something beneath the surface. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, the play of current and reflection, but soon the stories aligned. A face lingered in the water, pale and distorted, its mouth stretched in an endless scream. Some claimed the man's eyes burned with fury, as though he cursed every passerby. Others insisted he called out names, luring them closer with a voice that trembled just beneath the water's skin. A few swore that when they leaned too near, ripples pulled at their reflections, as if something below wanted to drag them under. The elders of the town did not argue, nor did they confirm. Their silence was its own warning, one carried through looks and gestures rather than words. Around fires, on porches, and in whispered exchanges, they repeated the same message that had been passed down for generations: never go against the legend.